Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, and Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investment Professionals of Australia, and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisor of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property investing. And Ben, this is another special week for us because for the last 74 or 75 episodes, we've done it a vodcast style, but this is our second. No, in fact, we've done podcast style, but this is our second vodcast.
It is.
And with a very special guest.
We do have a great guest on.
Now, folks, I've spent the last 5 years with two particular individuals professionally the most. One of them I spend on a daily basis for the last few years, and the other one I travelled around the country helping people buy their dream homes. But for the first time today, I'm actually going to introduce them both. Ben, Veronica, Ben.
We've met for the first time today after all of that time.
I know.
It's scary, isn't it?
It is.
Our paths haven't crossed.
No, they haven't. A bit weird, I guess. But me being from Sydney,
Yeah.
you being from Melbourne, there might be the explanation for that.
So what brings you down here?
Well, I might.
Bit of culture.
I might. Ooh, we've got a bit of city rivalry going on.
I lived in Sydney for 10 years, so I can sort of sit in both camps.
No, you can't. No, you can't. Oh, look, I love Melbourne.
Yep.
So I'm always happy to be down here. I'm actually here for the REBAA conference, so the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia.
Wow.
My God, conference.
That's almost as good as LLOA.
Yes.
Well, that's the most syllables in Australian television history. But you're the Vice President of the REBAA. What exactly is it?
Yes.
For the benefit of the listeners?
For the benefit of the listeners, the Real Estate Buyers Agents Association of Australia is a membership of exclusive buyers agents. So, look, I tell you why I joined, rather than what REBAA is about. How's that? I joined because, particularly with the show, we were raising the profile of buyers agents in this country and encouraging people to use buyers agents. And yet there is such a low barrier to entry that I thought, oh my God, I can't be encouraging poor consumers to basically go out there and be like sheep to the wolves, lambs to the wolves. So I joined REBAA so that we can try to raise the bar in the industry. So where the Office of Fair Trading in various states doesn't do the job, in my view, REBAA is going to step in, hopefully. As time goes on, that bar will go higher and higher.
Well, folks, that's only one of the things that Veronica does. Of course, she's my co-host on Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel. She's also the principal of a buyers agency company in Sydney called Good Deeds. How did that start?
Well, Good Deeds actually started purely by accident. And I think you've probably heard this story, Bryce, but
I haven't. So
you haven't heard this
I'm
story,
interested.
Ben.
Yeah.
I was a selling agent for 6 years. I took a year off when I had my daughter Molly, who's now 10, and I was interested in doing something still in real estate. I was sick of selling, really. It was a bit like Groundhog Day. And I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted to think more about what I was doing. And so I started exploring and dabbling in the buyer side of things. And I worked for some people who shall remain nameless, who is a miracle they're still in business. And the GFC hit.
Oh, I've missed this, Veronica.
Someone's got to Google that.
They can Google it, and there's a lot there. When the GFC hit, I discovered that this business that I was working for was not very financially sound, shall we say. And they owed me a lot of money, and I had these clients, and I was thinking, oh, what am I going to do? So I was basically offered the opportunity, life circumstances offered me the opportunity of setting up a business, which I wasn't setting out to do in the first place. So I did. The rest is history. That was February 2009 that I did that. And I've now got 6 staff, so a nice little modest business compared to yours, but it's
still fantastic.
It's fabulous. I love it.
And I think the name Good Deeds says a lot. It obviously hence that sort of passion to trying to see consumers get looked after.
Absolutely.
Yeah, brilliant.
What was it like just recently? Obviously, Sydney had a phenomenal time over the last 2 or 3 years. What was it like being a buyer's agent? Because it would have been enormously competitive, I'm sure.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I guess, interestingly enough, I think there's more buyers agents out there now as a consequence. Everyone thinks, oh, great, it's a way to make money. There's a lot more selling agents out there at the moment too, so hopefully they'll all get weeded out. You know, it'll go back to normal very shortly as the market returns to normal. It's been, buyers have really needed help, and more so than ever before. So that's been great for business. Obviously the phone's been ringing and the internet inquiry's been up, so it's kept everyone busy.
Well, as you know, we travel around the country and we buy properties in every state on the show. And one of the things that's really missing is a uniform system for each individual state. So I think Sydney is the hardest market to buy in, and probably the market where you need the buyer's agent the most. Would you agree?
It's funny because I have to say that, you know, working with you on the show was great because, of course, my experience is purely Sydney prior to that, and yours was, Western Australia, Queensland and Victoria, and so we pretty much filled the gaps, you know, and you say that our systems is complicated, and obviously it is, but I guess I would look at every other, system and think, oh God, that's massively complicated.
Well, more to the point that it's highly competitive, and getting the exchange system sorted out for
The gazumping.
The gazumping, yeah.
The gazumping laws in New South Wales are the best I've seen.
They're great.
So until the contracts are exchanged, you can be gazumped.
And what makes me laugh is that people think gazumping is illegal, and I have to say it is not illegal.
Yeah.
The cooling off period was introduced to protect consumers from gazumping. However, of course, if you're in a hot market, why would any owner, any vendor or any agent offer a cooling off period? Say, no, get yourself organised. We're not going to honour anything and no terms. But also, I think whether you're being gazumped or not, or whether it's okay or not, depends on whether you're the gazumper or the gazumpee.
That's right.
People can turn on a dime on that one.
Yeah. In a boom, you want to be the gazumper.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I almost got gazumped. In 2001 when I bought in Alexandria, the market was very hot then as well, if you remember. That was the sort of start of the last run before this heavy run we've had. And just as we were exchanging, someone offered another $15,000 on a $395,000 purchase. So it was hard work. And my conveyancer was just, we'll get it all together and all. It's like, I was fortunate enough that I just thought, I think we just need to get these exchanged.
Yeah.
Otherwise we're going to be in trouble. So I think, again, coming back to bringing in a professional that knows all of these tricks and knows all of these, the legalities of the process is highly advantageous.
So the question for you, Ben, with Veronica on the couch is, of the 4 seasons that we've done together...
It's been 4, has it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I should know that, shouldn't I?
40 episodes. We're keen to find out which was your favourite episode.
So, first of all, there was...
Was it the one the only one you've watched?
You've done two different shows.
Yeah. We have.
LLLA.
Correct.
And then the other one, Don't Tell Me.
No, we wouldn't want to we'll give you the rope.
I did watch that first episode of that one.
Oh.
That was when you had the Brisbane property, and then you had to buy up in Cairns or something. Was that?
Oh yes, right.
So the format of the show was you had to buy something owner occupied and something for investment.
Right.
Yeah, I remember that. What was it called?
That was
Relocation.
Relocation Australia.
Of course.
I even had to have voice coaching to learn how to say Australia properly. I did.
Those are the days.
Because remember that?
Australia.
Australia. No, it's Australia. So Australia.
I remember I was in the booth with the slightly off track. We had the executive producer was having an argument with me. I've got a H in my name. So for 39 years I'd been saying H, and she was telling me H, the old English way. We had a raging argument because she wouldn't let
it wouldn't let it
go.
You're not out of the booth until
I'm pretty stubborn, so I was like, Veronica and I have had a screaming match down.
Byron Bay we had one, didn't we? What was that about? Oh.
And the magic of television. And then Veronica and I have had a screaming match with the executive producer walking down the streets.
Yes, that's right, we did too. It was great.
Who wants to be in this TV thing?
We were very passionate.
We've got stuff to do.
So I've seen that episode, and I've seen 2 episodes of Location Australia.
Okay, so out of those 2, which was your favourite?
Yeah, it was a tough call. I quite liked the one, the couple in Adelaide. So you had the couple in Adelaide who, the older couple in Adelaide that you're buying for.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where Veronica was.
Yes, I can't remember where I was with that.
I reckon
I remember the
Sydney.
couple. I may have been.
Yeah, I know, because it's the only show I've seen.
Yeah. You don't have 40 to wear.
I think that was the one in Vaucluse. And they were unrealistic about their budget, and they were renting in Paddington.
She worked for Facebook. He was a solicitor.
Yeah.
Oh, that was that pairing up. Yeah, I remember them. Yeah.
Did they ever buy?
Not to my knowledge.
Yeah. I know they ultimately didn't buy at that phase. So there you go. So no, I'm highly versed. But the reality is, would a plumber go home and watch a plumbing show?
Weirdly enough, probably not.
Yeah. So So in my view, especially because I buy property for investment. So the last thing I really do, I do watch international shows because I do like to see the nuances and the differences in the different international markets. But in terms of the Australian show, watching an owner-occupier go through that emotional buy when I buy on the numbers, and I hopefully don't bring emotion to it. The jeopardy doesn't sort of.
Be fair to say you're not our target market.
So you just go, oh, so boring.
Is the footy on or something? That's
very
the honest
good.
truth.
Mate, that's good. That's what I like about you. You
That's
don't
all
sugarcoat it.
right.
I'm actually, there's two people on the couch who don't sugarcoat anything. But Veronica, you're a property investor as well, and this
Yes.
podcast is largely about giving the insider's guide to property investing. I know your philosophy on property investing, but for the benefit of the listeners and the viewers, what if you're about to go and buy a property this weekend to add into your portfolio? There are some rough frameworks that you like to work with: new versus old, cities, regional, that sort of thing.
There's a guiding philosophy or guiding principle in my business and in the way that I invest myself is that capital growth is king. You're not going to get rich on extra $100 a week rent. Even if you got extra yield, if you think about the interest that you repay over the life of a loan, people aren't even thinking about covering that really when they're just looking at positive cash flow, for instance. So capital growth is the lowest risk way to go into property. And obviously if you want to take risk when you've got a really solid portfolio, then that's a different conversation. But for most people who only buy one investment, capital growth, in my view, has to be king, which means that I avoid buying in risky areas or even areas where you're only buying because it's affordable. Because affordability when it comes to property investment equates risk. So I think that, I've got a bit of a bugbear that I think a lot of the people that are investing in property, they're doing it on a false belief. And it's really scary, and I think it's really tragic, the amount of people that are really getting lured into something that's not actually going to deliver what they hope it will.
Have you seen any scenarios in Sydney where there was that FOMO, that fear of missing out, where everyone, instead of just buying investment grade properties, they just put investment stock and they just put their name on a title, and now as that boom sort of starts to go back to equilibrium, are you seeing people come into you sort of with that sort of white knuckle or anxiety feeling that they might have bought off the plan or something that you'd consider inferior?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people get whipped into a frenzy, and it's people are sheep, and they all do what everybody else is doing, and they think, well, someone did it, so it must be a good idea. And there's this thing called social proof, and they don't coin terms like that because it doesn't ever happen. The stereotype is a stereotype because most people are like that. And so when you look at southwest Sydney, for instance, the suburb where the clearance rates plummeted in some suburbs under 50%. The inner west, the eastern suburbs were still sitting in the 70s. When you see that difference, and that it's those areas that go up and go down. They're the areas where a lot of these people are, the uninitiated, if you like, and the hopeful are flocking out there and buying, and they're the ones freaking out.
I agree. I'm curious, coming back to the capital growth is king. I mean, early on in my investment career and what I did for my household, I was absolutely so focused on capital growth. But when you become a property investment advisor, and let's say someone comes to you and they don't have the level of money to buy the 800, 900 million, mil two properties, do you see a lot of those, or is your client base just that sort of more professional client base where you don't have to sort of give them an alternative solution if their cash flow is less? Yeah,
look, I do see people that don't have enough, in my view, to buy a low risk investment property. And I'm, I guess, a very unusual buyer's agent, and I'm not scared to suggest to them that perhaps they don't need to be looking at buying a property for investment. There are other investment avenues that will actually be a lot better for them given where they're at. So, and I really don't think there's anything wrong with people reassessing their affordability, their cash flow, their risk profile, and getting better advice and thinking longer term. So the goal could be to buy a property at some point, but let's not force it now, because what you buy now could be a noose around your neck, and that's it. You're not going to get another chance to invest in anything. So it's about stepping back and helping them actually get to that point. And it might even be that they go into an investment or joint venture with a family member, for instance. There are other ways to skin a cat.
Yep. Obviously, we take a different view, as you know, in the sense that if clients come to us and they want to they want to get into bricks and mortar, and they potentially want to control the asset themselves. We, through the research that we've done, we can obviously identify, I definitely agree, I mean, mining areas, dangerous, areas that have lower socio-demographics, dangerous. So you're absolutely right. You make one false move into those markets, you end up with negative equity. Yeah. You're in all sorts of strife. But there's definitely areas around Australia. So take, for example, if we're buying a $700,000 asset in Sydney, we're scraping the bottom in the sense that
there's not many opportunities
there's
left.
not many opportunities in Sydney. But if we work on the same principles of what happens in a big city compared to what happens in a small city like an Adelaide or even a Hobart or some of those others, everyone sort of starts to go, well, wait a minute, I read the papers, there's no population growth in those areas, but there is still scarcity. And that $700,000 in Adelaide could actually buy you a period home, and a period home in the blue chip locations where the same nucleus or concentration of people and profiles of people are still there. Yep. So there may only be 100 anaesthetists instead of 4,000 anaesthetists like you get in, say, a Sydney market. So you've still got that high income, you've still got that land scarcity. So that's about that borderless investing concept. And we're fortunate enough that we've got research to be able to do that.
And that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, you've got to, I encourage any buyer to really understand their market that they're buying into. So if you engage a professional, obviously you're buying that knowledge and that resource. And certainly, I'm not here to say you never buy a good investment outside of in a Sydney or in a Melbourne. But what buyers have to understand is that, if they're chasing a dream, if it's the get rich quick idea, then it's probably going to fail. Yes. And if they win that way, if they actually succeed and actually manage to luck it, it is luck, and they've got to recognise it's luck and don't try and do it again. You just keep your money, keep it in your pocket.
I think it's a really good one. If you analyse someone who's bought in sort of a lower socio-demographic area that's had a boom and they've got 5 properties, I reckon 3 of those 5 are probably still struggling to perform and they're waiting.
Because we see them.
Yeah, we're waiting for that. It's going to happen soon. Whereas 2 have gone really well, the other 3 have tanked, usually.
And people are afraid to bail out of an underperforming asset, but also I see that there's no real industry benchmarks in terms of how to measure the performance of property. And we get people coming to us all the time, and I'm sure you get the same thing. Oh, I'm really happy with my investments, they're performing really well. And that's great. How are you measuring that performance?
Doesn't cost me anything each week.
It has
grown.
They made money. People talk about capital growth. Oh yeah, I made a lot of money. Have you ever benchmarked how your property performed against the median growth for that particular class of property, or what other properties may have performed at, And no, 0 seems to be the benchmark. If it's plus, they've done well. And I think that there's that lack of critical analysis that people of all types, of all walks of life, they're a bit scared.
Well, they've had this paper profit. I'll give you a good example. A few years ago, someone bought a property for $400,000 and it went to $500,000 over maybe 3 years. And they're sort of saying, I've made $100,000. And I just said, well, so let's unpack that a little bit more and let's go back to, okay, you've paid around $22,000 to $25,000 in interest each year. So there's $75,000 plus you've paid stamp duty of around $20,000. So you're about 5 to maybe 10 grand in front.
Yes.
Should we give you a round of applause?
And how's it going to go for the next 10 years?
And then you've got your selling costs on top of that. So I think there's a big message in, play the long game, but also asset selection is, the number one game in town compared to potentially cash flow. But if you can't get that, you can't get into that really signature property, we still do a bit of that buying in that sort of what we would call mid-tier range. So we've got blue chip and green chip. That's the sort of place that
green chip.
Green chip. That's how they say it in the share market. Sort of green, that up and comer. But as opposed to that lemon, those lemon areas, there's plenty of them out there.
Oh, I know. But I think what people don't realise is you get a blue chip area or a green chip area and you can buy a lemon property within those areas.
Yes.
And this is the thing that people think, my office is in Balmain and I buy in Balmain, I can't go wrong. Well, yes, you can. And it doesn't take me long to find some examples of how you can go wrong.
Yeah.
So do you subscribe to the theory that, because you're Balmain, Rozelle, Lilydale, all those sort of inner western sort of harbour suburbs, wouldn't it be better to buy, definitely not a dog in Balmain, but wouldn't it be better to buy an average property in Balmain than a really good property further out? Do you subscribe to the location doing most of the
most
heavy
of the
lifting?
legwork. Yeah, I do. I've got to put a caveat on that though. I really don't think you should buy a dog anywhere. Really.
Agreed. So, but what about if you're buying you're better off getting a B property in Balmain than an A property in a C suburb?
Yes.
Yep.
I think so.
Yep.
Yeah. And what I notice as well is over time, a good quality property in a good quality area will always have demand regardless of market conditions. So they're effectively immune to the market cycle, so if you're going out to C-grade areas or the further out you go from the epicentre effectively, you've got these peaks and troughs. So, good market knowledge, understanding what properties and what suburbs are going to grow and the infrastructure and all the things that we're looking for is one thing, but then you've got to sort of make sure that you buy at or close to the trough, and reading the market is, very, very challenging.
Yeah, the timing the market
and
call.
don't buy at the peak. And a lot of these, mining boom, poor people have basically lost their
They're vulnerable.
everything. Yeah. They've followed the masses and they've gone and bought at the peak. And that's the big problem with a lot of these areas that aren't, part of inner Sydney or inner Melbourne.
So the Balmain story you were just mentioning before, when you said it's not hard for you to find some of the underperformers, do you summarise that in terms of, has it been medium and high density stuff that's caused most of the pain there?
No.
Or what other observations have you had in that market?
Look, we really pull away from new and recent and very high density. So we pull away from that.
Yep.
But like any rule, there's an exception to a rule. And there are some buildings and some complexes that do extraordinarily well, but they've got history.
Yep.
They've got history, they're established, and we will buy in certain ones, and we know which buildings and which complexes they are.
So is that character, factory conversion type, or high ceiling models as opposed to that sort of Legoland stuff?
Sometime, but weirdly enough, it really depends. Okay, so a building gets built.
Yep.
A bunch of investors, these days Chinese investors buy it. Then it takes, 5-10 years before the resales start happening. The investors start selling out and the owner-occupiers start moving in. That's when you start seeing, forgetting the building quality, if it's a crap building, it's a crap building.
Yeah.
But that's when you start seeing whether there's going to be a community developed there and whether there's going to be ongoing buyer appeal and owner-occupier appeal. And so those buildings where that personality has started developing, and some of these aren't particularly amazing, architecturally or... It's just something about them, and some magic, for whatever reason, means that there's a community that has developed there and there's a certain demand and appeal about that particular development. And so we see a number of those, a lot of in the eastern suburbs, for instance, where that's the case.
So aspect, walk score, those types of things as well, they have to be...
All of that, but within those buildings or within those complexes, there's still a very small percentage that we would recommend anyone buy, because the floor plan's got to be good. The aspect has got to be away from the main roads, you know what I mean? So there's quite a lot of other caveats.
Yeah.
So following on from that, have you got a theory about apartments for investors? Are there two types of apartments in your view? And if so, what are they?
Well, you've got the high density, brand new or recently built, we don't touch with a barge pole.
Yep.
So yes, there's that. And we don't know what they're going to be like in the future. As in Melbourne, there are sections of Sydney which are massively overdeveloped and full of renters or empty even. When you've got a lot of Chinese investors, for instance, they're just
parking their money.
Parking
they
money.
Don't care if it's rented or not.
So you don't want to be in that sort of in that sort of development or that area. So what we do look at is existing stock and with a history, so that you can actually look at and measure. The best predictor of the future is the past, and so we are looking for that sort of thing. The walkability scores and all those. It's the lifestyle. People have got to want to live there because they want to live there, not because it's close to work.
Yeah.
I think the established apartments in Sydney if in the right location, are a really good buy, because there's a rough rule of thumb that 1 in 3 people live in an apartment in Sydney, 1 in 4 in Melbourne, 1 in 5 in Brisbane. So that number's great, but when you think about the concentration of population in those cities and then throw that number over the top of that, there's a lot of people that accept that as standard.
I agree. They're acclimatised to it. So the density is acceptable in the generations that have grown up in that area. I mean, I say to people, how do you read that? Well, you just land at Sydney Airport and you can look as far as the eye can see, and there's 8-storey, 9-storey, 10-storey high buildings everywhere, and that pushes out for 30 or 40 kilometres. You land in Melbourne you've got to pretty much get into sort of Flemington Road before you start to see 6 or 7 story high buildings. So we have no doubt that over time, as density continues to build out, that there will be more people who will accept that apartment living, is going to be for them. And you're already there, in terms of what I see in the Sydney market.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you think about European cities, for instance, and people, my sister lives in Italy and she's got two boys and everybody lives in apartments. It's and if you live in a house, it's on the outskirts. And so there's the idea of living in the centre versus living on the outskirts. And that's, obviously Sydney's a modern city. It's got there's no charm necessarily in the inner city, but this commuting time, and also Sydney's got terrible infrastructure, as we all know. So the traffic is appalling most of the day, most days of the week. The public transport is fine if you live in certain directions, but in terms of crossing the city, it's awkward. People are choosing to actually spend less time commuting, and so therefore that lends itself to people agreeing to live in smaller properties with children even. And so there's a different move. And if you look about, the 60s or say the 70s, when, the idea of getting out of the city and getting your quarter acre block and your house in the burbs, that was appealing.
Traffic, no congestion.
Yeah.
It was easy.
Oh, but that was a sign of you've done all
Success.
right.
Poor people were in the city.
Yeah,
got in your EH Holden and you drove out there, life was good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Very true.
Yeah, it's changed.
I'm a lot younger than you two. I wouldn't remember those memories.
Oh,
there we go.
Yeah.
Can you remember your first property investment?
Oh, absolutely.
Never forget your first?
I know. Well, I haven't forgotten any of them. When I include my homes as investments as well, because I think owner-occupiers need to think like investors. So therefore, my first property was a 36 square metre studio apartment in Newtown.
Wow.
Right, there we go. Yeah.
And we're back in the 90s. So it's interesting actually, because I look back often and I think it cost me $129,000. I had a $6,500 deposit.
A lot of cash.
I paid, I think, $3,000 in stamp duty.
Yeah.
So the bank lent me 95% on a 36 square metre property.
Wow.
Now, if you want to help first home buyers get into the market, you need to do that, but obviously control development at the same time.
Yeah.
And so what a great opportunity. However, I wish I had some good advice, because if I'd had some good advice, maybe I actually would have found out what my maximum capacity was, and maybe I would have bought a little semi-detached house in the next suburb, and I'd be a hell of a lot better off because I wouldn't have had to sell that to upgrade, because the banks changed their rules, of course, by the time I bought a house, and I had to sell it even though it was positive cash flow by that time. I lived in it for a year and rented it out. It was a great little investment. I'd be more than happy to keep it. Yeah. But, in terms of first property, I should have pushed myself harder.
Yeah, very true.
So have you invested outside of Sydney?
No, and interestingly enough, I do consider doing so, and it will be in Melbourne if I do it. I probably will do it. I've got other plans for my properties in the meantime, so it's not in the short term. But one reason why I think that I would like to do that is because I'm sick of, I feel, I want to vomit every time I get a land tax bill.
I was going to say it was going to be land tax.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And every year I get the land tax bill and I go back and I review all my properties and it's all right, I'm ahead. I'm way ahead, I'm actually way ahead of the land tax bill, but it's a horrible bill.
Yeah, it is. It's a non-productive tax.
Oh.
It's almost as good as the window tax they introduced in the 17th century in England.
Tax?
So that's how they did it. They basically didn't have enough money to run the government at the time, and they thought, well, wealthier people had windows in their houses, so they actually went and counted all the windows and introduced a window tax as a bit of a wealth tax. Because again, the poor people didn't have the windows and the wealthier did have more windows.
It'd be interesting to see what impact that had on architecture, just the period straight afterwards, because all of a sudden these blank walls, that would have been perfect for a window.
Sort of circle portholes or something like that.
Filled it in.
So if you were going back to, we're in 2016, you're going back to 1990, Veronica who bought that first property, besides the fact that you'd get some advice around borrowing more, what are the lessons that you've learned in that time, and what would you tell yourself back then? Here's
another lesson I learned. So I bought a house that I lived in, and then I moved out after a few years and I rented that out for a while too, and then I sold that, and then I bought another house as an investment that I wanted to renovate. So I bought specifically something that could be rented out in the short term to get plans approved and do quite a significant renovation. which I did, and so I still have that property, and probably will sell it.
Don't sell.
Well, no.
Don't sell.
Part of my problem with that is that I have so much equity in it, and which is
Sorry,
great.
I'm not
Of course,
seeing the problem.
No. It gives me options.
Yes.
It's giving me options. So,
Options are good.
So when I say it's a problem, I've got equity. Obviously, a lot of that equity has come through the market. A lot of that equity came through doing the renovation.
Yeah.
But some of it misguidedly was by paying too much of it down.
So
If only I paid something else down instead of that. But
Yeah.
that's, that is what it is.
well, ultimately, you still want to live off the cash flow, don't you? Or is your end game to sell down and, well, like when you, because a lot of people don't think about
Yeah.
what the final stage of the process is. For us, it's very clear. We just want to live off the rent roll.
Absolutely. But I think I'll probably have to sell 1 or 2 properties just to pay off all the debt.
Yep.
But
if the portfolio is cash flow positive and it's generating enough for you as well as paying off some of the
Exactly.
debt, would you still hold on to them?
probably, yeah.
good.
There's no
Makes
reason
sense.
to sell
No,
under
no,
those
no.
circumstances.
Yep.
Yeah, in fact, in reality, I mean, that's exactly where it would be given
Yeah.
the way that I approach investing. I'm very safe. I don't like taking risk.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, so the property that I renovated, the one that I'm considering selling for lots of reasons. Where was I going? Oh, yes. So I had a very socialist friend who we used to talk about public housing.
Yeah.
Okay, and we concocted this idea that we thought was a fabulous idea, that every street in the country should have one house for those in need, for social housing, rather than these ghettos and those horrible apartment blocks and concentrations of public housing. So this was our, starry-eyed, lovely, very socialist
Give back,
idea.
you
Give
know,
back.
pay it forward.
How many red wines was that?
Usually quite a few by the time we really got the nitty-gritty of this plan. So this was our little utopia type idea. And I bought this particular property before I was a buyer's agent, but I was a selling agent.
Yeah.
And so many people come up to me and say, "Oh, I've got my selling agent, bidding for me on an auction or something like that." And I think, selling agents, they really do pay too much for property, because selling agents think that every single property is good at the right price. So they're not critical enough in their thinking, and I sure as hell wasn't back then. So, cutting back to the idea of one house in every street. So I bought this particular property. It's a semi-detached house in Leichhardt. And I subsequently done the full renovation and all the rest of it. And of course, I didn't do the sort of due diligence back then when I was a selling agent that I would do right now as a buyer's agent. And one of those things would be to just look at the neighbouring properties.
They're the social ones?
Well,
I thought you were ready to donate yours into
Yeah,
that.
there was
No, I'm not that. I'm definitely not that sort of socialist.
Not in Leichhardt anyway.
So the house right next to my house, I just assumed was a bit of a wog box, and I mean that with the greatest respect to wogs, but they like concrete and brick. Okay, so this thing was concrete and brick till the cows come home, pretty ugly and solid as, and I figured it was just another wog box, and I never questioned that.
Yeah.
Turns out it's owned by an organisation, and it does have some social housing tenants, and I had a bit of a land rights claim in my own backyard, literally, because I moved the fence back onto where it belonged when I did the renovation, and I discovered the neighbours weren't real happy. They'd been there 14 years and they liked the fence where it was, and they had a real bit of a go at me because they felt that I was taking their land.
Adverse possession rule?
And I was like, well, I've got council approval and a construction certificate and
the surveyors have been in there and they've measured where the
absolutely,
fence should be.
We know where the fence should be, and so it was a bit of an interesting thing, and that was fine. We got over that, but the first set of tenants that I did have in the property, even before I renovated, they got upset because one of the tenants next door was hiding in their dog kennel and scared them a bit, and I lost one lot of tenants. And
As you do.
we haven't had any issues at all for quite a number of years now, but it made me laugh when I became a buyer's agent to think, well, I used to say there should be a social housing house in every single street, and I put my money where my mouth is. I just didn't know it at the time.
Yeah. So
Well, you would have noticed the gentrification over time that's gone on in that area now. I'm assuming that, there's a lot less of that type of demographic in the area as they're being pushed out from a price point of view?
Well, I guess unless while the government still owns that sort of property, then obviously
there'll still be a smaller concentration.
There's actually been some redevelopment. I mean, certainly the New South Wales government is restructuring their housing portfolio, and so they are redeveloping and moving people on and doing a bit of that. So there's a bit of a change, but certainly in the eastern suburbs, there's change afoot. Yeah,
and it's not that we're saying that you don't want that type, because they bring. Sort of Newtown as a perfect example. Walk up and down Newtown, you'll always see the characters. And they make the area for for some sort of observational thing. But certainly mental health issues is a big problem, and you certainly don't want to feel unsafe, and you don't want your tenants to feel unsafe in the house that they rent off you.
I think people. I like to think that I'm compassionate, and I like. People need help. I personally, this is getting into a political area, but it does bother me that the institutionalisation of this public housing and the setup there doesn't actually help people who really desperately need it. Like women's refuges, and there's a massive underfunding of people that the absolute, point of need aren't getting. And I do think that the government really needs to reassign their assets, and
priorities.
When they're holding property in really expensive areas, that money could be put to better use, and obviously that then leads into gentrification, and there's a whole political issue around that, and it's
affordability in the whole.
So
it's difficult. It's not an easy fix.
It's not easy.
No.
Couple of quick ones for you before we go. I remember when we were travelling, you told me the story about the chocolate wheel or the money wheel at the casino.
Yes.
So to help our listeners and our viewers get the insights of a selling agent versus a buyer's agent, can you tell that story again?
Well, this feeds into how I determine what a good property is to buy too. But when I was a selling agent, you'd be called out to an appraisal, and you'd be driving down the street and you're looking at the numbers. I'm going to number 20 for argument's sake, and you go past number 14. Oh, that's really nice. And you're looking ahead and you're thinking, oh, I hope it's that house. And you drive past, and it's a bit like the Wheel of Fortune wheel, and you go tick, 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 tick. And then you pull up outside the house, you're going to be doing the appraisal, and you go, is it a bankrupt? Is it the bankrupt wheel, wedge of the wheel, or is it the $100,000? Yes. So the jackpot or the bankrupt. And so when you're listing, you pull up outside the jackpot house, and you think, fantastic, this is an easy one. Or the bankrupt is, it's a listing, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. Yep. When I'm buying, I apply the same principle in reverse.
Yeah. Because it's an important point to make, because most of our viewers and our listeners are actually from the buyer side, and they're often taking advice from the real estate agent who, if he or she doesn't sell that property, they don't eat. So therefore, they've got an agenda driven by the outcome of that property.
Absolutely.
So that's why using a buyer's agent allows you to be impartial. They don't have to. They can move on from different properties. So that analogy is really stuck in my head.
Now, I've got a true false story that I heard that Bryce was telling me about you. Is it true that you use a coin on the floor to check the level?
Marble.
It's a marble, it's a marble.
I was only talking about this yesterday. It's hilarious. So funny. You dropped the marble.
She's done it on the show.
Okay, there you go. Well,
it was one of the other 39 episodes, mate.
It's a true false for me, because I haven't watched the show.
Well,
it's hilarious to watch it in action, I have to say. If you suspect there's a bit of subsidence,
marble, not a coin. Okay.
And you just...
But she's got an advantage, mate, because she keeps the marble in a handbag. Where are you going to keep your marble?
Yeah. Next question.
Actually, I don't want you to answer.
But where is the marble when you need it? There's been times when I haven't had the marble in my bag. And,
that's good.
There's too many one-liners.
Now, do you do it when
Ronnie?
there's so many people coming through, just lying it down, and the floors are out, all the other buyers start to panic. Like, roll it down when everyone else is there. I think that's a great idea.
There's lots of really simple things that buyers could do and don't, though. Yeah. Loads. That's just one of them.
Give us some tips.
Come on.
Well, I mean, how's the one? I still can't get over the fact of only once seen anybody else do this. In New South Wales, you've got to register to bid at auction. And in fact, I think everywhere except Victoria.
Not everywhere, but they're starting to.
Pretty much. I know in Queensland you do, I know in South Australia you do. So we've got to register in order to bid at auction. So if you want to know what you're up against, or how many people you're up against, or get a sense of the vibe of what the auction's going to be like, well,
hang around the
go
table.
and watch people register.
Yeah.
And yet I've only ever once seen somebody else do it, and it happened to be she clocked me and went, "Oh, I read the article you said to do that." She bought it.
Don't you hate that when it works against you when you're trying to buy a property?
I walked up to, I did one in Sydney a couple of weeks back and flew, and I went up and said, "Can I have a look at the register at the end?" And she said, "Oh no, look." I'm like,
Of course not.
"Oh, can you?"
You didn't get there early enough,
Well,
Ben.
but what can I ask? I asked the question, how many bidders have we got? And she's going, "Oh, look," and I said, "Can I just have a look at the book?" What? I mean, if it's supposed to be a transparent
This is why
process,
you need a Sydney-based buyer's agent.
but if it's going to be a transparent process, why not? You know,
Not that transparent.
Well, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Well, I want to know how many buyers or how many people are in there. But I mean, look, you
You have
know,
to invest an extra half an hour.
you know who's going to be there. You know who's serious or not, and if people can register whatever. I mean, you can pick them out in the crowd.
You
most
can,
of the time.
yeah. They're pretty. There's types in a crowd. Last one for you. Do your clients get disappointed when you can't secure them a property in 48 minutes like you do on the show?
Or, they expect me to deliver 3 and go, "Here, choose one." It doesn't work that way.
Oh, where's the cameras? Aren't we going to be on camera? So,
How many times have you had that happen where they've said, "Oh, how quick's this process going to be?"
Oh, they ask it every time.
Yeah.
well, there was one point I had to do an auction for Ronnie in Bondi because she couldn't fit it into her schedule because she was overseas. So I flew up and did the auction. They wouldn't let us film in the auction room, which was the biggest shame because I've waited my whole career to walk into a room and someone just went, "Oh no, he's here." It's like, I've been waiting forever for that to happen. We were intimidated by the point we walked in and we got it for them. So, but of course no one knew that, Ronnie. It looked like you bought it.
I know. It's a
On the
lovely
show.
thing about editing suites.
I know.
Yes.
Got to be in control of the edit. Don't go on a television show when you're not in control of the edit. Oh, well, that's... it's
flown.
It's flown. But,
It's absolutely flying.
I guess for anyone who's interested in reaching out to Veronica, we'll have all of her details on thepropertycouch.com.au. So if you're in Sydney, you want to have a chat, or if you like the show and you want to reach out to her, she's on Instagram, she's on Twitter, she's on all of that sort of stuff. So we'll have some of those details for you. But it's been great having you on. I haven't seen you for a while.
It's been lovely meeting you.
Yeah, lovely to meet you.
I'll give you a kiss and a hug later. And it's been good seeing you.
I know, it's been way too long. But at this point, Ben has, at every point at the podcast,
Oh, I
he
did
signs
see
off.
this.
And he hasn't prepared because he doesn't have
I just walk
the
on
sheet.
set.
So
We don't have the sheet,
No,
so we're
apparently I-
breaking a tradition.
Well, can we think of one? Have we got one that we can just pull off?
Well,
off the top
you
of our
speak
head?
Italian, don't you?
Oh, I'm not sure I speak enough Italian.
Or do you know how to say goodbye in Italian? Isn't it?
Ciao.
Ciao bella.
Easy. So there you go. Well, you didn't need the preparation, mate.
Arrivederci.
Well, there you go, folks. It's been great having Veronica on the Property Couch. Not only is she a buyer's agent, not only is she the Vice President of REBAA, but she's a buyer's agent herself, and I can vouch that she's a very, very good one. So if you want to go to and join the conversation, go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram for the Property Couch, and of course, if you're listening to this podcast and you'd like to watch it, go to our YouTube channel and check it out. So thanks again, Veronica, for coming on.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We'll see you next time in Melbourne.
Yeah.
All right, folks, until next week,
Ciao.
ciao.
Arrivederci.